Hell Let Loose Vietnam is only 2 weeks away from going into a full 1.0 release after being delayed once already. Over the weekend, we were allowed to have a little glimpse into what that release might look like, and I have some great things to say that show that when this game actually works, it's a great experience with a familiarity to the predecessor. On the other hand, there are some decisions that leave me scratching my head a little bit that I hope are improved on by the time the game releases, or are at least a priority with the future updates after release. But to start off, let's take a look at the roles and weaponry that were available. The Vietnam War is famous for both governments designing and getting their hands on whatever was available to arm their soldiers better than the enemy. This included getting old World War II, Korean War era weaponry, or getting experimental. Both teams practically have the same kind of roles with slight differences that does express some form of asymmetry between the factions, but not to a great extent. For instance, the Viets are able to build tunnels by the squad leader or the commander as a form of fast travel to get around the map, which really does dunk on the US helicopters when you compare them from a competitive lens. You are able to link up the tunnels with garrisons placed around the map, which means you can put a tunnel and a garrison in a safe location and then use exit points on other parts of the maps. This does cause the Viets to be a little sneaky and makes the US have to do some search and destroy to remove them. There is this cool animation that plays when you enter and exit a tunnel, but people are disappointed that this isn't an actual physical thing that you crawl through that could involve the US having to deploy tunnel rats to clear out and destroy it. However, the tunnel rat scenario doesn't necessarily work a whole lot since the M1917 isn't in the game, and the devs did kind of overblow the asymmetry aspect in the Q&A, and it is, as I said, it isn't as significant as you think, at least from what I've played. And when you compare the factions side by side, it's like comparing the Soviets and Germans in base Hell Let Loose. Sure, there are differences, but in the end of the day, they are designed in a way like that Borat meme where I have this, they also have this. One funny thing I noticed about the roles is that there is a weight system that does increase as you level up, but it is a little stupid because I get grenade launcher, US must get grenade launcher. I get primary weapon with my rocket launcher, he cannot afford. Great success. I was a little bit dumbfounded during the testing that you equip a law, but then you can't equip a primary at the same time, and I just thought that was a little bit stupid, and I hope they do sort of work on that so that isn't the case. But this leads on to the type of weapons that are available. You have the iconic M16A1 Type 56, and the animations are beautiful. I will give the game credit. The animations on a lot of the weapons are fluid, they have heft, but there is a lack of weaponry that does make the standard infantry role go stale a little quickly. The Viets only have the AK and the Mosin. I never thought I'd say this, but where is the SKS? The leftover French weaponry, even captured American weapons like the M1 carbine. The specialist roles do get a little bit more leeway with a K50M and even one with a drum magazine. The double barrel shotgun, well, that's more or less it. The US only get the M16 or M16 with a bayonet. I know people will just comment it'll get added later on, it's a live service game. I mean, come on, don't we want the 1.0 release to be as fleshed out, especially in regards to the factions as possible, so they can explore adding in more experimental or lesser known weapons of the war, like the Polish, Czech and Soviet AKs, or even adding in entirely new factions, hopefully, or giving roles like the Recon class more experimental weapons, since, you know, I'd consider them like the MACV, at least that's how I was playing the role. But, you know, I mean, at least give the Americans the M14, so there is some player choice on their playstyle, because when I was playing as the Viets, if I wanted full auto, sort of to take up a run and gun more thing, I know tactical shooter players probably cringed at me saying run and gun, but if I wanted something more fast-paced, I'll take the Type 56. If I just wanted to sit and get long-range shots from a defensive position, the Mosin gun gave me that option, as it was much better than the AK at range. But since the roles are incredibly similar to base Hell Let Loose, Recon goes and searches for nodes and enemy structures behind enemy lines. Medic has a dragging mechanic, which I saw used once, and I did kind of call it a year ago saying it's a cool mechanic, but people won't really use it a whole lot since people hardly play the medic in public games. Engineers build nodes, support drop supplies. There is a unique mortar squad now, which is basically the artillery squad, except you can choose where to build it around the map. Look, the formula as a whole that you will see throughout the video is that it does feel like an expansion for Hell Let Loose. Sure, there are some new mechanics to learn, but a lot of skills from the former do apply to the latter. And honestly, one way to really put it, it's like the Bad Company 2 Vietnam expansion for that game. That's sort of how I'd compare the former and the latter. Now, moving on to the gameplay, which is the most important part, and how it compares to the core Hell Let Loose formula, which usually involves spawning in and dying to a big explosion, or in this case, a napalm strike, which is genuinely breathtaking and really well done with a unique form of suppression that I suppose is meant to emulate the heat that you would feel next to a big explosion. The closest I've come to that is at the stunt show at Movie World, which has a little fireball, but still at the distance I was sitting, you do feel it sort of hit you in the face, which I can't imagine what this poor bugger is feeling though. But the suppression system has some good things to it, creating those tense moments where you have to take cover and you struggle to get your bearings and try and bandage yourself, and it does depict or put the hell in Hell Let Loose. That's definitely how I felt at times. The TTK of the weapons is all over the place, and this extends to a larger problem I will mention in a moment, but at times you'll shoot someone and it can take an embarrassing amount of time to actually secure the kill, and it felt like I was shooting paintballs at the enemy, and I wasn't sure if this was a netcode related issue, and thank God I was playing on Australian servers, or a fence that wasn't rendering. Sometimes graphics just wouldn't load. There are objects floating in the sky, invisible walls. This is a problem in almost any video game that can work against you or for you, like the no render cheese in RS2, sitting 10 kilometers away on Ream again, how the fuck you say that map, and being able to see through the walls and just lob tank shells at incredible distance. But in Hell Let Loose Vietnam, it was, hopefully they do fix it, it was a much bigger problem that absolutely has to be rectified by 1.0, because a lot of the structures and graphics just outright wouldn't load for me playing as infantry, and it caused a fair bit of issues and confusion. The weapon handling themselves have bounce to them, and it doesn't feel like you are a super soldier with perfect accurate aim, but I understand they probably made the muzzle flashes pretty big as to make it easier to see in a bush. And speaking of the bushes, I think the jungle has been done really well, especially in terms of density. You have moments where you have to really keep an eye out and listen for movement. People did bring up the argument it's a bush Wookiee's wet dream, but I mean, it's the Vietnam War. I mean, what do you want? There's bushes and jungles in Vietnam, and it was used definitely to the North's advantage at times, until, well, napalm was introduced. But yeah, I mean, I think they did the bushes incredibly well, and you do have to sort of adjust your playstyle from the trenches of Europe to something entirely different. And another thing I'll give the game credit for is, I understand there have been a couple of performance issues, which I'll mention later on, but for me, at least, I think running at around 100 plus FPS on the highest settings without frame generation has been a drastic improvement from the very first test that I played on a couple months ago, so that was good to see. And even compared to base Hell Let Loose, I noticed that I don't get any weird stuttering or like random frame drops. Performance-wise, in my case, where I do have a better PC, was much better than base Hell Let Loose. But we haven't talked about the most important thing about Hell Let Loose. If Hell Let Loose were to remove this one thing or make any drastic changes to it, I probably wouldn't play this game. And that is the tanking. In its current state, the gunner's view is pretty bad in terms of performance, where it feels like it drastically drops frames, but it's very consistent with the previous games, with the exception being that the tanks feel a little faster despite having the speed of a light tank from the previous game. They perform very similarly. The only difference I noticed is that the M48 being a little sluggish, because the T-54-55, it's just better in my opinion, since it's significantly harder to see at a distance, which allows you to have the moments where you can just mop up the enemy and keep pelting a point or a garrison with HE. The tanking experience as a whole is incredibly fun, especially when you can get into some good vantage points and really put the gun to use. And the thing is, the only two tanks that are in the game were actually classed as mediums, so hopefully in the future we see the implementation of scouts and light tanks with more specialized role, like recon tanks, the Bulldog, the Sheridan, T-34-85. I think that'll be cool, because I really want that tank in the base Hell Let Loose, but if we get it in Hell Let Loose Vietnam, I'll still be happy. But the helicopters, can't have a Vietnam game without them. Can't have a Vietnam movie without them. Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore, I hope I said that right, might like the smell of napalm in the morning, but I love the sound of a Huey spooling up in the morning, until you realize that that's almost all you hear 90% of the time. The devs absolutely do need to do something about the sound before release, which from the recent patch notes that I've seen, they are going to be working on it. But in terms of the test, what I experienced is that you were able to hear them basically everywhere on the map. There would just be the constant sound of a helicopter, and you might say, oh, it's realistic, but the spatial sound isn't that good, especially when you think one is closer than it actually is. And after a while, honestly, the constant helicopter sound just drove me mad. And if you've played a game like Squad 44, you'll know that tanks are diabolically loud, and they can be heard from almost anywhere. And the helicopters in Hell Let Loose Vietnam are similar, and it does get annoying after a while just because of how loud they are. But it is good that they added a tutorial that you have to do before taking some of the important roles, even though a lot of them are just very bare bones and just go over the controls. But I think it's better than nothing. However, I did experience a bit of a glitch where I completed the squad leader training and the commander training, but then the game wouldn't recognize it when I go into a server, which was pretty frustrating because I wanted to create a squad to play with a couple of my mates that they actually voluntarily got the game this time. I didn't actually have to force them to play it. But while this was a public test for everyone from console to PC, it has made me be very thankful for the community servers that we may take for granted that have some semblance of cohesion and teamwork, since the test was chaotic. Nodes not built, outpost garrisons, forget about it. It was a cluster, and thrown into it was the horrendous VoIP system, which, surprise surprise, because of Epic Games, which sent a chill down every RS2 player's spine, which actually they did manage to fix that up recently. I'll talk about that in a new video, but thankfully the devs have said that they are aware of the issue and are hopefully going to fix it by the time the game releases. But this did result in a robotic voice where you'd speak, and also push to talk would be a toggle, and it did lead to some of the worst hot micing I've ever seen, me included, because I cursed out a player or two without realizing it was being publicly broadcasted. But the devs are aware of this. As a matter of fact, they are aware of the... Fuck me, I can't speak. They are aware of a lot of the issues that I did bring up, and that you and I have probably experienced throughout the testing, and we can only hope that they do manage to actually nail these out before the game goes into a 1.0 release, because this is an early access. Okay, I think criticism, if it does release with some of these, is completely and entirely fair game, but this leads on to just the grander aspect or perspective of things, and that is, this game is going into 1.0, not early access. 1.0 was supposed to be released months ago, and thankfully they delayed it, but with the clock ticking, are they capable of getting the game up to an acceptable 1.0 state that will ensure people stick around? But there's also another issue. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent. This is another issue, and it sort of goes off on the community server aspect of things, especially from the perspective of an Australian, right? Because the servers for new games are very delicate, and if people in Australia don't stick around, then the servers will die, and then I'll have to join the American servers, and it's just, you know, no offense to them, but, you know, I want to play with Australians with good ping. But what I'm trying to say is that you have established clans, communities in Hell Let Loose. They have been there for 5+ years, since the game has started. They are entrenched. You have locals, you have people that are just familiar with the server. The difficult thing is creating a product for starters, that encourages them to drop $50, $60 on the game Australian, and then move those players, those entrenched players from the previous game, to the new game and keep them sticking around to ensure that if I want to play, of course, me, but you know, that ensures that if an Australian wants to play, then there will be a full server available. I'm kind of fucking up the way I'm trying to express it, but what I'm trying to say is Hell Let Loose Vietnam needs to be in a state where the people from the previous game are willing to move and stick around to the new game. That's probably as blunt and simple as I can put it. But compared to the very first test that I played, they have done some monumental improvements, especially towards the performance on PC. But the biggest selling point is that this game is Hell Let Loose with the Vietnam skin over it. I very much prefer the appeal of Vietnam over World War II, and I can see this being a game I'd dedicate more time to compared to the previous game, but that is only because of the setting, not because of some unique thing or feature that Hell Let Loose Vietnam does better than the previous game. But look, I'll give a more in-depth perspective once the game actually releases on the August 13th, 14th, depending on your time zone, and if that's something you'd like to see, leave a like, subscribe, even if I kind of piss you off with some of my thoughts and feelings. But my name is Tan2, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.